I'm a world traveller. I've been all over in the past 2 years and stayed in all sorts of places, from old colonial homes to fancy new high rises. I've been in Budapest for a week or so, and I'm living in an old building that has to be at least 200 years old. In order to access my unit, you have to take the main elevator to the third floor and then walk up a derelict staircase to make it to the fifth floor. As soon as you walk up the stairs, you'll trigger a motion sensor that lights up the seldomly used floor I'm on. I felt this strange presence on this floor. I hear footsteps in the halls when there's clearly nobody else living here besides me, and a friend that's staying in the same unit. I hear my name being called by my friend who at the time was out of the house. Another thing is, when I enter the bathroom, it almost seems and feels like someone is closing the door behind me, as the door doesn't close on its own unless I walk through it. The other night, around 3 a.m., I had trouble sleeping, and I went onto what used to be a communal balcony, but it's now used solely by myself for a cigarette. And I heard someone frantically running up the stairs, footsteps heavy enough to indicate a man of some nature. The motion sensor triggered and the hallway lit up. I'm being extra cautious at this point, and I'm now basically smoking in the hallway. Nobody came up those stairs. I sat back down on the balcony and heard the same thing. Now on my second cigarette, being the chain smoker I am, I go back in the hallway and again the footsteps stop. Thinking I'm losing my mind, I go into my unit and firmly close the door behind me until I hear the lock click in place. I go about my business and sit at my desk with my back turned towards the door. The door can only be unlocked with a code. If someone enters this code, the mechanism creates a beeping sound. After about 15 minutes on my laptop, I get up to go to bed, and the door behind me that was locked was wide open, and the censored lights in the halls are lit up. I close the door and turn on the flashlight on my phone to investigate my unit. Make sure nobody else is in there with me while my back is turned. There was nobody, and no noise indicating anyone had come to the door to open it or had gone inside. I go to bed, and I'm awakened by a smash in the halls a few hours later, around 5:30 a.m. The door is wide open again. Nothing was stolen, and there's plenty to steal, and my friend never woke up once during this entire time. I get this uneasy feeling in the halls, and the derelict staircase leads 6 stories down into only what I can call an abyss. A totally dark and damp basement that has been in disuse for 100 or so years. I'm the only one who smokes, but sometimes it smells like cigarettes in and around the balcony I spend my time smoking on. What is this? And what does it want from me? I can't wait to leave here. I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time. I've worked at facilities in Texas and in Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I've had there and in other prisons I worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was like 3 a.m. at this point. No prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. They, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit we were working in was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small, quiet cells in a hallway, not directly visible from the officer station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. There was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was, I was at a loss for words. Later that night, I checked the door again, and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. Another experience I had was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 or 2 a.m., and I was sitting inside the officer station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at a table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room, and no one is sitting at the table I just saw on camera. I ask my partner to go check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station and we both watch this video over and over. Later on the same night, during one of my rounds, I noticed a wet floor sign that got left out. I returned it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station and look back to where the porter closet is and see the same wet floor sign out. I ask my partner if they're playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away. My partner denies anything to do with it. I go back out and make sure I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door. Get back to the officer station, wet floor sign right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now. It starts to tip over on one end very slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground. It then proceeds to slide quickly up the hallway and then back to in front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night because we were scared shitless. One more notable one from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, a really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of our close observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say they're suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they're a lot cooler and near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras and all of a sudden, we saw a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually, it comes to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy. I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell. I ask the prisoner if they're okay, and the prisoner tells me that something doesn't feel right, and they're hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner called for assistance because the prisoner had bit the skin of their own wrists, causing them to bleed, held them above their head, and allegedly was speaking in tongues. When I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that's now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I've had there. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices, cold chills. The first really noticeable experience I had was around Christmas time on the 3rd shift. I was working in the oldest unit of the facility. Usually, we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained, because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night, watching TV in between them. I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older, unused, condemned part of the prison. I open the door and take a look down the hallway. A cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs stand on end. I close the door thoroughly and creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again. The TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because I'm scared shitless. One day on the 3rd shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch. We decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, the old unstaffed gun towers. We eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see, because this section is so old it's not powered. The energy back there I won't ever forget. Just being there filled with a feeling of dread. I ask my friend to head back, and we start to head back down to where the hallway to the gate was. My friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it to the hallway, barely able to see anything in almost pitch blackness. We hear something running after us, so we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the keys as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. Later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. I have a friend who's into spiritual stuff, meditates a lot, makes small cleaning rituals, etc. I'm more like a skeptic person, always trying to find a logical reason for weird stuff. This all changed though, when I visited my friend last November. We wanted to go for a walk in the evening like we often do, and I sensed that something was off with him. When I asked him, he told me that there's something in his apartment. Something weird. I wanted to go and take a look. So we went to his apartment, and as soon as we went in there, it did not really feel as welcoming as it normally did. His cat came sprinting to him as soon as we entered, and she acted a bit stressed. He told me he saw someone standing in his living room at night when he went to go to the toilet. But whenever he looked and turned on all the lights, there'd be nothing there. I felt really uneasy while he told me this, and I always looked around. It felt like someone was watching me. After a while, I asked him if we could leave. He agreed, and I walked to his apartment door. He then went into his bedroom, which was on the other side of the living room, and door to the apartment because he was looking for his cat to maybe come with us. I told him I'll be waiting outside, and as I said that, I left the apartment, door wide open, and as soon as I was out in the hall, the door suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang. My friend came rushing out, pale as flour, and his cat didn't even hesitate to just jump down the stairs and sprint to the main door of the house. I just stood there, shocked. My friend leaned against the wall, saying nothing at all. He stayed the night at his mother's house with his cat. Of course, we talked about this later. I tried to find a logical way to explain what had happened, but there was no window open in his apartment, and the door to the main hall of the house was closed too. The door is a massive old wooden door which is a little bit hard to open and to close. To this day, both of us don't know what the cause of this was, but after this evening, the weird stuff that happened didn't occur again. This happened back at the end of December 2021. I was working as a security guard in a big museum, which is the former Castle of Augustus II of Saxony. We had to shut down because, you know the reason, and had not much work to do. Mostly I and my co-workers had to come in because we had to look after workers who fixed electric stuff, such as lights and chandeliers. It was the perfect time, because nobody else was allowed in the castle, so they could work at their own speed, which meant, for us security guards, that we often had to be there for 10 to 11 hours, just looking after those guys, if they even showed up. Sometimes they just didn't. Because it was in the winter, it became dark very early, meaning it was sometimes kind of creepy walking all alone through the big halls of the castle. But nothing was as creepy as the stuff I experienced in the antechambers and throne room of Augustus II. Those rooms were the main attraction, covered in golden ornaments and red royal carpets on every wall, all remade by hand after most of it got destroyed back in World War II. There was this big iron door at the first hall, separating the chambers from the rest of the museum. I once had the shift that would walk around the west part of the second floor to close all the doors in the evening, from the tower room to the end of the chambers. It was all going well, until I stood in the second antechamber just before the throne room, when I suddenly heard steps from the exact other side of the wall. There was the former garderobe of Augustus II, as well as some of its wives' dresses. The rooms originally led to the bedchamber, but were separated by a big, heavy oak door that was hard to open and was loud as fuck if you did so. Now there were those steps. I turned around, looking into the first antechamber, but I saw nothing. The big iron door was still closed, so I went through the hall, around the corner to the garderobe room. Maybe someone from the castle used one fire exit to look for something in the exhibition, but there was nothing in there. Even as I walked around the whole two rooms, looking in every corner, I found nothing at all. So I went back, and now back in the throne room, and just as I entered it, I heard those footsteps again, but this time, they went exactly from one of the garderobe rooms right into the bedroom, which was separated by this big oak door. I rushed into the bedroom, looked around, and there was nobody. The big oak door was still closed. The steps had vanished. I got out, since nobody was in there, and told this to one of my co-workers who was waiting outside, so he could finally turn on the alarm system. I even asked him if he saw someone coming out of the exhibition, which he answered with a no, but then told me that this is not the first time someone heard steps, especially in the chambers. I'm not a big believer in ghosts, but I've had two experiences that have kind of shifted my perspective. One of them was when I lived in Bellingham, Washington. My wife and I moved into a house at the end of Virginia Street back in 2016. The house was in decent condition, but certainly older. We had a daughter who was about 5 or 6 at the time, and a newborn. After moving in, we noticed a few strange things happening. We never felt threatened by whatever was in the house. After moving in, my wife wanted to finally get cable TV. Having worked with Comcast before, I've always seen cable as a bit of a waste of money. But she wanted it, so we got it. A day or two later, I was asleep and having a dream that the TV was really loud in the other room. My wife woke me up and said someone was in the house and they had turned on the TV. So, it wasn't a dream. I told her to stay in the room with the baby and the phone to call the police if she heard a commotion, and I got my pistol. And I carefully moved towards the living room. It was hard to hear if anyone was moving around because the TV was so loud, pretty much full volume. But I tried to pay attention anyway because I knew I needed to have positive identification before raising the pistol and the house was dark. Waving a gun at shadows is how innocent people get shot. I got to the living room and didn't find anything, so I kept moving. I didn't turn off the TV because I figured the loud noise would mask the sound of my movements. Since it was my house, I figured I had the home court advantage against an intruder. I was very lucid, given that I had just been dead asleep, but adrenaline is like that. I ultimately cleared the entire house and didn't find anything. The TV had apparently just come on by itself. Stuff happens, I figured, as I turned off the TV and stood in complete silence. Wires get crossed. The old man across the street may have turned on his TV, and the same remote frequency may have activated our TV. Who knows? I secured my pistol and tried to go back to sleep. A few days later, I picked up my daughter at school. Dad, I have to tell you something. Great, I thought. My daughter got put in some time out again at school for being disruptive. She's always been a bit of a lovable blabbermouth. What happened? Last night my TV came on by itself. I might have normally brushed this off with the same crossed wires or TV remote logic gymnastics, but my daughter's TV was only connected to a PS3, which we used so she could watch Netflix. It takes 2 separate remotes to turn anything on. Now things were creepy. Because my security contracting job had me work all over at different times of the day, My wife and I would frequently sleep in different rooms, so I didn't wake her up when I went to work. After I went to bed one night, I heard running up and down the hallway. Just quick little footsteps running past my door. I got up and opened the door to tell my daughter to stop running. Simultaneously, my wife opened her bedroom door, opposite mine across the hallway, to tell our daughter the same thing. Are you making all that noise? No, I said. I thought it was Issa. But I could see into our daughter's room and see her asleep in bed. She's asleep. And she was. Not in the way kids pretend to be asleep so they don't get yelled out to go to bed. This was asleep with drool coming out of her mouth and hair covering her face. Completely out. My wife and I didn't talk about the footsteps that we had both heard running down the hallway. A few days later, I was in bed again in the spare bedroom, almost asleep. I heard the terrible noise of what could only be the unmistakable sound of a plastic sippy cup falling into the linoleum in the kitchen and bouncing around for what seemed like an eternity. I've got her this time, I thought, tossing the blankets off so I could go tell our daughter to go back to bed. I grumpily walked to the kitchen and flicked on the light. Nothing. No cup, no explanation for the sound. My wife followed. What was that noise? Nothing, I said. I didn't need to freak her out. We had both become more aware of a presence in that house. Not evil, just annoying. Like they were starting to let us know our time as their house guests had come to an end, and it was time to leave. A little while later, my wife and I were sitting on the couch. As we watched TV, we heard this slow squeaking sound. We looked around to see where it was coming from. It took a second for us to notice it was the door to the linen closet in the hallway being opened because it was opening so slowly. The door had a mirror on the inside, and we slowly watched as the door opened until we sat there, staring at our own reflection. We just sat there silently, trying to find one impossible explanation for why our house couldn't actually be haunted. Very shortly afterward, I got a new position, and we were scheduled to move across the country. We had a garage sale and sold whatever items we could to reduce the amount of junk we would otherwise have to pack or throw away. A few neighbours picked through our stuff, and I eventually got into a conversation with an older gentleman about why we were moving. I remember when this house first got here a few years ago, he said, unsolicited. The house was in good condition, but old. Old cabinets and fixtures, a pink toilet and bathtub, something from the late 70s to early 80s. Something an old lady like my grandma would live in. Sir, I said, correcting him, this house certainly wasn't built only a few years ago. No, that's when it first arrived here. The old house was brought in from somewhere else and put on this lot. If he had told me some old lady had died in that house, I'm sure I would have lost my mind. I certainly wasn't going to ask. A most unusual thing happened to me a few mornings ago. It was about 4:45 a.m. and I got up to use the restroom. I walked into the hallway and passed by my daughter's bedroom. I was by this time wide awake. Right away, I noticed that a door was ajar and the ceiling light was on. This seemed strange because she rarely gets up early in the morning. I looked and saw that she was watching her phone, holding it horizontally, as if she was playing a video. This was odd, because she always uses her laptop, not her phone, to watch things. I called her name, wondering why she was awake. She was leaning up, not sitting straight, with her knees also bent. She had no back support. The position was odd, not at all comfortable. It was as if she'd begun to sit up, and time stopped. She didn't react or turn toward me, even though I'd spoken her name in quite a loud voice. She wasn't moving, just sitting up in this strange position, as if a video was paused. When I told my daughter what I'd seen, she had no recollection of being awake that early, or of me stopping by her room. Another odd thing happened simultaneously. One of my dog, who always chases our cat, usually barks like crazy. While I stood at her door, the dog ran into her room, then around the end of her bed, not barking or looking for the cat. He then shot out of the room, as if startled by something. I turned to go continue down the hall, thinking it was weird that my daughter didn't react at all, that she was just watching the phone, sitting at an angle in suspended animation. I didn't think about the dog being frightened until I got to my bedroom. Upon returning from the restroom, I noticed that the bedroom light was off. I was definitely awake. Back in 2017, I lived at a house with some very fucked up vibes. Everyone in my family heavily struggled with mental health and anger issues at that house. Everyone felt watched, all the time. I could never sleep at night. The closet opened by itself all the time. My next door neighbour and I picked up on it, and we would investigate. We found some odd shit, like the crawl space having blood on a rock that looked fresh. I took some photos on the iPad. Anyways, eventually we moved out of that house. And at the new house, my mom told me a guy lived in it a while ago and had committed suicide. I had an iPad, but around the end of us moving out, it stopped turning on. Yesterday, I plugged it in for the first time in almost 5 years for the hell of it. I came back in a few hours to put it back, but to my surprise it had turned on. I became determined to figure out the password. After a lot of unsuccessful attempts, I started to have a persistent thought of 4 numbers. I asked my parents about these 4 numbers, and my mom said it would make sense if I changed one of them. It was my last attempt of the night, and I thought for sure it wouldn't work. But I typed in the 4 numbers, and the iPad opened. I didn't have time to look through it that night, so I put it back and tried to sleep. But I couldn't sleep, because I felt this horrible sense of dread. The light was doing weird things on the curtain, and I felt on edge like someone was watching me. Like back in 2017. I don't know, maybe it's all a coincidence. I just feel like something weird is bound to that iPad. There are a lot of photos from the old house on that iPad. I'm a lot younger than my cousin. About 15 years. I'm the baby in the family. This happened when I was 17. I'm 45 now. My cousin, let's call him Bob, was married to Judy, and they were expecting their first baby. Judy was 8 months pregnant and everything was fine. Until it wasn't. Right before Christmas, we got a call that Judy was rushed to the hospital. She had sudden case of preeclampsia. Very soon after, she was transported to a specialised hospital. Later that evening, we had another call that Judy had suffered a minor brain hemorrhage and that the baby died as a consequence. Judy's condition was stable and scans showed no real damage to her brain. The neurologist was convinced she would make a complete recovery. I went to bed that night, sad but also knowing that at least Judy would survive. That night, I had the most vivid and real dream I've ever had. I was walking down the hallway of a hospital when I saw one of the doors wide open. I peeked inside and I saw a whole bunch of people looking down on something. I was curious, so I approached to have a look myself. The people gave me room to watch, and there he was, a teeny little baby boy sleeping in a crib. He looked so happy and comfortable. I just knew this was Bob's and Judy's son. Then I heard Judy's voice right behind me, and I turned around. She was still in a hospital gown, but she looked happy and radiant. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, but I have to go. I have to go with him to care for him." And she nodded at the baby boy in his crib. She started to cry, and so did I. She then gave me a very tight hug, and at that moment, I woke up, with tears rolling down my cheeks. I couldn't sleep anymore that night, and very early in the morning, I heard my parents coming up the stairs, followed by a knock on my door. My dad came in crying. He told me that Judy had another brain hemorrhage that night and was now declared to be brain dead. On January 23rd, 2005, a firefighter named Curtis Mayron lost his life in a fire accident in New York. This day would then be remembered as Black Sunday by the people of New York ever since. Along with Curtis, 2 other firefighters would have died that day. Curtis's wife Jeanette and his 2 daughters Deneen and Angela understandably were devastated by their father's sudden demise. Since these events gained nationwide attention, the family were constantly pestered by the media, which further intensified their mental suffering. Also, the house they lived in was built by Curtis himself, and his memories haunted them when they stayed in the house. As a result, the family decided to move somewhere far from the current home. So, Jeanette began her house hunt online, during which she stumbled upon a property that seemed a steal for its asking price. Also, this house was situated on the outskirts of the city. Jeanette visited this property and, upon inspection, understood that the house needed to be restored. However, she ended up buying the house as her husband's firefighter friends offered to help her with the renovations. Quickly after purchasing the house, even before renovating it, the family moved into a house. During this mass renovation, a lot of windows and doors that secured the house were in need of being removed, and Jeanette was worried about the property's security. So she ended up fixing 7 surveillance cameras all around the house. The cameras live streamed the footage to her laptop. Jeanette started to watch this footage to while away the time. One day, in one particular feed that showed an area of the house which was adjacent to the woods, she saw something disturbing. In the feed, she saw a figure that appeared to be a cloaked man emerge slowly out of the woods and walk through the driveway of the house. He stopped at a point and started eerily staring at the house. As a shocked Jeanette continued watching the feed, the man walked back into the woods and disappeared. Since the quality of the feed was not great, Jeanette was not able to clearly figure out what she had seen on it, and as she stood there wondering what it was, her daughters experienced their first paranormal experiences in that house. While Jeanette stood there wondering, Angela, who was upstairs reading a book while leaning on the wall behind her bed, heard someone tapping on the wall she was leaning on. The sound of the taps increased with time, and eventually it felt as if someone was trying to get her attention. She went near the room door, opened it slightly, and peeked through it to see who was tapping the wall. But to her surprise, she found no one. She saw that her sister's room was closed and her mom was looking into her laptop. She thought that she was making it up and went back to her room to continue reading her book. To make sure that she was the one making it up, she placed her ear on the wall to see if the sound still persisted. But as soon as her ear touched the wall, she heard a loud thud on the wall which petrified her. She jumped onto her bed and hid under the blanket in terror. At the same time, Deneen heard someone knock on her room's door. However, when she opened it, she found no one. She saw her mother in the hall and her sister's room closed, and thought that the knocks were just her imagination. When she closed the door and got back into her room, she heard 3 distinctive taps this time. When she opened the door, similar to the previous time, she found no one. The young girl shut the door and snuck under her bed in fright. The next day, Jeanette overheard her daughters speaking about the experiences they had the previous day. She immediately interrupted their conversation and told them that since the house was new to them, the normal sounds it makes creeped them out. A few days later, the basement was scheduled to be renovated next. Upon investigation, her husband's friends found that the basement was cluttered with unused items. As they removed the things, they found a pentagram and called Jeanette to show it to her. In order to prevent their daughters from freaking out, she asked them to paint over it. Her daughters, however, had found multiple pentagrams all around their house, but hid them from their mother, thinking that she would be unnerved if she came to know about it. One day, Angela had to stay all alone in the house for a few hours, and during this period, she was asked by her mother to clean the refrigerator. As she was cleaning the refrigerator in the kitchen, Angela constantly felt as if someone was around her. The presence became so intimidating that she decided to clean the refrigerator after her mom returned. As she closed the refrigerator door, she was startled by the sound of multiple utensils being thrown around. She ran to her room in fear and rolled herself up in a corner of the room. When Jeanette returned, she was terrified looking at the state of her kitchen and immediately ran to her daughter's room to check on her. Angela explained to her what happened, and Jeanette couldn't reject it because of the look Angela had on her face. Jeanette was induced into a guilt trip for not being able to help her daughters. The renovation was reaching its final stages, and the walls of the house were the next in the checklist. While demoing on the walls, a journal tied in lace was found by the crew. They called Jeanette and gave it to her. The journal had the year in which the house was constructed, the photo of its original owner, and a few weird drawings. On looking at those drawings for a few more seconds, Jeanette figured out they were sacrifice ritual drawings, and all of them pointed to the basement of the house. Yet again, to avoid scaring her daughters, she destroyed the journal. One day, while Angela was in her room listening to songs on her headphones, she heard someone call out her name. She went out of her room to check if her mom and sister had called her, but her mom was washing the dishes, and her sister was in the bathroom taking a shower. Because of the previous experiences she had in the house, she went back to her room in fear. As she entered her room, she heard the voice call her again, but this time it said, "Call Deneen." Before she could comprehend what she had heard her sister shout at the top of her voice from the bathroom. Angela and her mother rushed into the bathroom and saw Deneen curled up on the floor. They wrapped her in a towel and took her back to her room. So why did Deneen shout? She heard the voice of a man and footsteps in the bathroom, and as she looked through the frosted shower room glass, a huge hand hit the glass hard. After hearing this, Jeanette wanted to leave the house at once, but her financial investment and the renovation efforts her husband's friends had put into the house stopped her. Angela was finding it hard and always went out of the house every time she had a chance. One such day, she went out of the house and sat on a swing near the driveway. Jeanette, however, made sure she had her eyes on her daughter and kept watching her through the window while washing the dishes. Once her washing was done, she went to the hall, opened her laptop, and watched over her daughter through the camera feeds. As she watched, she saw the same black cloaked figure come out of the woods and stand right next to her daughter. As she ran out of the house toward her daughter, she heard the screams of her daughter. When she went near Angela, the figure was already gone, and Angela was on the ground with a badly hurt ankle. She said that someone had pushed her from the swing. After this incident, Jeanette never left her daughter alone at the house. One day, however, she had gone to a pharmacy and left her Angela all alone in the house after a long time. As soon as she left, Angela went to her room, put on her headphones, played her favourite music, and closed her eyes in an attempt to sleep. With her eyes closed, along with the song that she was playing, she heard loud banging sounds. As she opened her eyes, she saw her closet door rattling. She snuck under her bed, crawled towards the wall, and looked at the closet door. She saw the door forcefully open, and a figure walked out of it. The only part of this figure that looked human was its feet. The figure slowly walked towards her bed, stood near it for a few minutes, and walked out the room. She heard it go downstairs, and gave out a sigh of relief. The sound of its footsteps stopped, and Angela tried crawling in. But while she was halfway out, she heard the figure come running up the stairs. It stood right in front of the bed with its toes pointing towards her. The figure got on top of her bed, and slowly its head descended with its sunken eyes staring right at Angela. The figure appeared to have skin rotting away from its head. Angela squeals at this eerie sight, after which the creature goes back onto the bed. She heard it jump off the bed, but it was nowhere to be seen. The footsteps, however, were being heard all around the house. Angela went through this ordeal for almost 45 minutes, after which her mother returned. The house was cleansed, after which the paranormal event stopped. The family still resides in this house with one obscure question. What in actuality haunted this house? There's a house in Gary, Indiana, which is fondly called the Demon House. However, if you walk through the street in which it's located, you wouldn't even notice it. This modest single-story house that has 3 bedrooms in it looks nothing extraordinary from the neighbouring constructions, but the house has a dark history. Latoya Ammons, who was a mother of 3, lived in the house along with her mother Rosa Campbell and her kids. This woman reported to the police that her children were thrown on walls by demons. When the police got her report, They at first thought that Latoya was an incompetent parent, so they sent child protective services and police officers to make sure she was a woman fit to be a parent. However, the police, when they arrived, were shocked by what they saw. After multiple allegations against Latoya for apparently treating her kids badly, and her own report of her children getting thrown against the wall by demons, the police sent child protective services to the house to investigate and make sure that the house was a safe place for her children. Along with the case manager, Valerie Washington, Lieutenant Gruska was sent by the sheriff's department to aid her. When Gruska entered the house, Valerie pulls him away from the family's hearing zone and tells him about the things she had figured out in her investigation. 8 days ago, Washington was in a hospital, sitting in a waiting room along with a psychologist. Latoya's mother, Rosa, Latoya's oldest son, Andrew, and her youngest son, Amante. When they were talking with each other, Amante walked to the middle of the room in a tranced state, with his back rolled into his skull, and started to make a deep growling sound which was extremely deep for a 7-year-old. While Washington and the psychologist were petrified at this sight, Rosa didn't seem to budge, and her behaviour was as if she had seen it before. She walked towards him, held his hand, and started to repeatedly shout, "You are not you." As she kept saying, "You are not you," Amante started to backpedal towards a wall, and as Rosa still kept holding his hands firmly, he started walking up the wall by pressing against Rosa. He kept walking up the wall, tiptoed himself on the ceiling, flipped over, and landed on his feet. Washington and the psychologist, freaked out by this behaviour, literally ran out of the room and dragged a doctor back with them. The doctor, in utter disbelief, asked Amante if he could do that again, but he replied, "I didn't do anything." After hearing Washington's story, 2 other officers named Miller and Austin were sent to the house to aid with their investigation. So the 4 of them asked Latoya to accompany them inside the house. However, she would instinctively reject them, and she told them that she and her kids would never enter the house again. As a result, Rosa would enter the house again with the 4 other investigators. The group went around the house taking pictures and recording videos the whole time. After they were done with the other parts of the house, they entered the basement of the house. According to Latoya, it was the basement that was paranormally the most active. The investigators, upon entering the basement, saw burned down candles, an altar, and a nativity scene. Gruska would also notice that the area under the staircase had broken concrete pieces, which indicated that the flooring part was ripped apart. When Rosa was questioned about the weirdness the basement beheld, she simply said, "There's a presence down there." The group then split up as Gruska and Austin stayed back in the basement to click a few extra pictures while the others went upstairs. As Gruska walked back upstairs, he saw Rosa waiting for him. She asked him if he took pictures under the stairs, to which he said yes. It was then she would reveal something disturbing. She said, "Sometimes at night, when we're sleeping on the main floor, we'll hear commotion in the basement." She also said that it sounded like someone was bumping on the underside of the stairs, and then they would hear footsteps walking up the wooden steps. But whatever it was, they would stop on the other side of the door and stay there for hours, which stopped them from opening the door. Gruska immediately went back to his office and uploaded the pictures he took in the basement. In one of the pictures he took under the stairs, he saw a white cloud on the right side of the picture. When zoomed in, something that appeared like a man's face appeared in the cloud. In the zoomed in picture, he noticed a green mist on the left side, and on this mist appeared something that appeared to be a woman's face. However, Gruska and Austin, who stayed back in the basement, swore that they didn't see any such mist. When they listened to the audio they had recorded in the basement, apart from their voice, they heard a third voice in a deep, grumpy voice say, "Hey." After his investigation, Gruska decided to visit Father Maginot, after which a second investigation was done in the house. April 30th, Gruska met Latoya Amon's priest named Maginot. Father Maginot had visited the Amon's residence 5 days before the investigation started, and when he visited, the family still inhabited the place. So, to get an understanding of the ambience of the house when the family resided in it, Gruska interviewed Father Maginot. Father Maginot said that he was called to the house by Latoya herself to fight the demons in the house. When he was sitting on the main floor with the family, the bathroom lights started flickering. To check what it was, he went into the bathroom, but the moment he stepped inside, the flickering stopped. But when he came out and sat in its place, it started to flicker again. This cycle continued multiple times. When this was going on, Latoya pointed out a liquid forming on the window blinds in the room that they were all sitting in. Father Maginot walked towards it to give a closer look. He found that the liquid was dripping down without a source, as there appeared to be no leaks. As he was investigating, he along with the family saw a cord that controls the blind, moving all by itself. The window was closed, and they couldn't find a logical explanation. As Father Maginot stood there trying to contemplate the things going on around him, he saw a huge shoe print right next to him. It was too big to match the footprints of the people in the house. He advised the family not to be in the house any longer, and this was the reason for the family moving out. On May 10th, Gruska, with a new child protective services manager and a bunch of police officers, went back to Ammon's house. By then, the house had been uninhabited for at least 2 weeks. When Gruska arrived, he was greeted by Father Maginot, Latoya's family, and a whole other bunch of officers with canine units. But why so many officials this time? The reason was that extreme weirdness like home invasion intruders in the house was being reported about the house. Before commencing their second home study, the officers sent in a canine to rule out human presence. The dog came back normally, indicating there was no one else in the house. After this event, Latoya, Father Maginot, and the police officials entered the house. When they entered, they found the main level undisturbed. However, as they entered the basement, they found a couple of extremely odd things. As they entered, they found an oily substance on the stairs with no clear origins. The oil went all the way down the stairs and disappeared under the staircase. As they began walking through the stairs, the new case manager touched a cabinet that seemed built in on the walls near the stairs. As soon as she touched it, she screamed in pain. She said that her hand started hurting the moment she touched it and turned pale white. Her pinky was badly hurt just by touching the cabinet. The crew descended further into the basement, trailing the oil, and ended up under the stairs. By this time, the police officials were quite convinced that something in that zone was the cause of all these disturbances, and they decided to dig up the dirt present there. As Gruska dug up almost 2 feet under, he found a pink dress-on fingernail and a woman's underwear. As he continued digging, he found a pin, a lid of a pan from the house, and other things from the family. The things they found made the officials think that someone had been taking things from upstairs and digging them under the stairs. They then put the soil back in place and decided to leave the basement. As they left the house, Rosa called them and showed them something weird. There was the same oily substance dripping on the window blinds. This resembled what Father Maginot had confessed. The officers at first suspected that Rosa was behind it, so Gruska wiped off the liquid and crew went out of the house. They returned 25 minutes later to find the liquid back again on the blind. Father Maginot told them that throughout history, liquid oozing out of nowhere was common in demon-infested houses. They then left the house and locked it. Austin, the officer who accompanied Gruska during his first investigation in the basement, captured a few snaps of the house when it was closed and inhabited. In one of the official photographs he took, a shadow figure was seen standing in the exact same position where the liquid was oozing from. The house was bought by Zach Bagans, the host of Ghost Adventures. He made a documentary of the house and later demolished it in 2016. Melanie, a 24-year-old new mother, is the protagonist of this story. After many struggles, she got hitched to the love of her life, and because of her love for kids, became a mother within a year after her marriage. She works as an associate manager at Wendy's International, and she was on maternity leave during this event. Melanie is an extremely pious woman, and she never starts a day without prayers. Melanie's husband had to go off the station for his work. As a result, she decided to stay in her parents' home until he returned. With her newborn not even aging a month, she moved into her parents' house on the 25th of June, 2015. She received quite a warm welcome from her parents. Unfortunately for her, her infant constantly kept crying at night and never allowed her to sleep. This forced her to sleep during the day while leaving her infant in the care of her parents. Eventually, this sleep pattern turned out to become a routine, and she became a night owl. All of a sudden, one day, her baby started acting weird. She refused to feed and constantly kept shouting at the top of her high-pitched voice. The baby gazed at an empty corner of the house, and her face expressed extreme fear. Her cries didn't stop until she was taken out of the house. Melanie was confused by the baby's behavior and called her doctor, asking him for suggestions. He advised her to bring the baby to the hospital so that he could check the reason for her cries in person. Melanie obliged, and she paid a visit to the hospital with her baby. However, things didn't change, and the baby kept constantly crying for the entire day. Surprisingly, that night, the baby fell sound asleep, which left Melanie as the only person awake in the house. The atmosphere in the room slowly began to change to dark, and she started to feel as if someone was watching her. However, despite completely checking the room, she found no one other than herself and her baby inside the room. As she crossed a closet in her room to get back on her bed, she heard a hard knock on her closet door. Before she could gather herself, the knock started to grow and become more and more pronounced. Gathering all her courage together, she opened the closet door, closing her eyes. As she slowly opened her eyes, she saw nothing. She laughed to herself, thinking of how gullible she was, and went back to her bed, concluding that the knock was nothing but a hallucination. But was she actually hallucinating? The answer is no. A few minutes later, the knock started again, but this time, even more aggressive. However, Melanie did not pay much attention, and continued pursuing her mission, which was to fall asleep. The knocks grew louder and louder, and all of a sudden, the closet door burst open. It was at this moment that Melanie understood she was not hallucinating. In the dimly lit room, she saw a shadow which appeared to be that of a woman in her gown, slowly emerging out of the closet. Once the shadow appeared to move out of the closet completely, the closet door shut. As she directed her focus towards the thud of the closed door, the shadow disappeared in thin air. Shaken, Melanie ran out of her bed to seek her parents' help, but the bedroom door wouldn't open despite her best efforts. With tears in her eyes, she turned on the lights and took a rosary with her to the bed, hoping that it would protect her and her baby from whatever the shadow was. As she sat on the bed with her baby in her arms, gazing at the closet in front of her, the clock struck 1 a.m. A few minutes later, she heard the knocks yet again, but this time from the window behind her head. She quickly turned around, but she found no one near the window. As she slowly turned back, she saw the shadow standing right next to her, staring at her baby with its featureless face. She pointed the rosary at the figure, but it didn't budge. While she looked at the shadow in terror, she heard a whisper in her ears. It said, "Thanks for bringing your baby to me." She saw that shadow hover its hands over the baby's neck, and the baby began to cry yet again. The cries eventually muted, and the baby began foaming at the mouth. Melanie tried calling her doctor with her phone, but it was to no avail. The baby's heartbeat slowly reduced as Melanie was crying helplessly. Melanie met the fate no other mother would wish for, and she saw her baby slowly die right in front of her eyes. After claiming the life of the innocent soul, the figure never appeared again. To communicate with their deceased mother, two sisters used a Ouija board. However, This Ouija board session would be the starting point for strange, terrifying events in their house. Were these events caused by the phantom of their mom, or a demon, or another human? In 1986, Annie and Jessica Andrews lost their mother to cancer. After the abrupt loss of their loving mom, the girls were left mentally devastated. Also, her demise meant that their father, Brian Andrews, had to work for a longer period to fend off the house's needs. This significantly increased the time these girls spent alone at the house. Their time alone at the house made them miss their mom's presence even more. As a result, one night when they were alone at the house, the girls decided to use a Ouija board to connect with their mother's soul. So they went down to the basement, and with their half-baked knowledge of how to use it, the girls tried communicating with their mother. Did it work? The Ouija board did not work out as intended. However, the girls were able to feel closer to their mom. The girls put away the board and went back to their respective rooms to sleep. With the night aging fast and their father not returning yet, Jessica heard a tapping sound from the walls of her room. Not sure if it was only her experiencing, she walked into Annie's room to check with her if she heard it as well. To her surprise, Annie was hearing the sound as well. Because of the mentally vulnerable situation they were in, the girls began thinking that it was their mother trying to communicate with them. The girls tried asking questions in hopes of their mother answering, but it never happened. Although scared, the girls were also feeling better as, according to them, their mother's ghost was around them. When Brian got home, the tapping had already stopped, and the girls told him about the events that occurred at home while he was not around. However, Brian was not so happy on hearing this. In fact, he had mixed emotions. He thought the girls were making it up out of their grief and felt bad for them. He also thought about putting them into therapy. He told the girls that their mom was indeed looking out for them and asked them to go check to their room and sleep. After they went back, Brian thought about giving them grief counselling, and he slept as well. The tapping, however, persisted for days, and it got worse as days went on. They tried asking his father's help, but he just wouldn't believe them. Eventually, the girls started going crazy over the sound as their sleep started getting disrupted. Also, every time they would leave the house locked and come back, the stuff inside the house would appear to have moved around. Brian would blame his daughters for this, but the girls were actually innocent. He advised them to stop the ruckus, even though they didn't do it, and told them that he would make them meet a grief counsellor if it continued. The girls were insistent that they were innocent, but their father just wouldn't believe it. The fact that their father didn't believe them put the girls in a terrible situation. The events grew violent, and the girls eventually realised whoever was doing this was not their mother. They concluded that an evil entity had latched itself to them after the Ouija board session they had. One evening in January 1987, while sitting in front room of the house, the girls started hearing the tapping sound yet again, but this time it appeared to be coming from the basement. Although scared, the girls felt that they had been through enough abuse and walked into the basement yielding a knife to confront the unknown entity. They found nothing except a note written in red reading, "Come find me. I'm in your closet." The girls were petrified and ran out of the house. They knocked on their neighbour's house and explained to them what happened. The girls stayed in their house until his dad arrived. Brian, already exhausted from his long day at work, got angry at the girls and asked them not to defame their house to live their ghostly fantasy. This was a tipping point, and he sent the girls to a grief counsellor. These events ceased for a while, until another night when the girls were all alone yet again. They started hearing the tapping again, and it seemed to be coming from Annie's bedroom. As the girls went into the room, they saw something written on the wall, and it read, "I'm back. Find me if you can." The girls ran to their neighbour's home and stayed there until their dad returned. After returning, their dad shouted at them in rage and went alone in the house to investigate it himself. As he entered, he saw the stuff inside the house completely disordered. It was at this point he understood that the girls were not lying. As he walked through the mess, he found another note written on the wall, and it read, "Marry me." As he gazed through, he found something even more strange. A young boy dressed in his wife's clothing stood inside the closet with a hatchet. As soon as he got to know that Brian saw him, this young boy ran away from him and magically disappeared. He left the house in a panic and went to his neighbour's home. He made sure his daughters were all right and called the police. The police investigated the house thoroughly, but they couldn't find any clues. They asked the family to leave the house until they found the young guy Brian had seen. For the next 2 weeks, the family stayed in one of their relatives' houses. Throughout this period, one question kept ringing in Brian's head. How did the guy magically disappear? Also, Brian went through a guilt trip for not trusting his daughters. During this period, no whereabouts of the young boy were found. As their relative's house was too packed, the family decided to move back into their house as they felt that the boy would not return because of the police's attention at the house. As the family was nearing the house, Brian saw a light turned on the second floor of the balcony. As he got a closer look, he saw the boy in the same attire standing next to a window, looking at them. He rushed to the police and told them what he saw. Brian, along with the police officials, entered the house, and as they entered, they saw pennies glued all across the house. Police searched in every nook and corner of the house, but they couldn't find any traces. However, when one police officer investigated the basement, he found a wooden piece behind the dryer. When he moved the dryer, he was surprised by how effortless it was. When he moved the wooden piece, he found a hidden crawl space. When they tracked it, they found that it went through all the walls in the house. Upon inspecting these mazy spaces, they found the man behind all this mess, Daniel LePlanque. He was caught red-handed inside these crawl spaces. The deranged teenager, after breaking up with Annie, had stayed in between the walls of the house for 2 whole months, stalking her and her family the entire time, through the peek holes he made in the walls of the house. He used the Ouija board session to create a narrative to spook the girls. I have a 16-year-old daughter who apparently snuck out of her room last night. She hasn't been home, hasn't gone to work, can't get a hold of her from any of her friends. I'm scared to death, is what Skylar's dad told 911 when she went missing. On July 5th, 2012, 16-year-old Skylar niece returned home after a night shift at Wendy's. She was all exhausted into her family's apartment, told her parents she was extremely tired, hugged them, and told them that she loved them. Then, her parents literally saw her walk through the first floor hallway, enter her room, and shut the door as always. The next day, her parents, Mary and Dave, woke up early as they had to go to work, but Skylar seemed to be still sleeping, as her door was still shut. Once their morning chores were done, they left for work without seeing or speaking with Skylar, as they didn't want to disturb their sleeping daughter. Later that day, Dave returned early from work and found her daughter's room still closed. Guessing that she was still asleep, he knocked on her door trying to wake her up, but as there was no answer, he broke into the room. He stood, staring at his daughter's bed, and she wasn't there. Skylar was the girl who always told her parents about her plans for the day, so Dave initially thought if his daughter had informed her anything. But as he couldn't recollect anything, he tried ringing her. She wasn't reachable. So he called his wife Marie, who told her to check with one of her friends as she might be with them. Dave, in a panicked state, rang Sheila, who was one of Skylar's close friends. Sheila told him that Skylar was not with her, and they spoke the previous night when everything seemed to be okay. Dave asked her to let him know if she gets to know the whereabouts of his daughter, and hung up the call. Dave ventured into his daughter's room in search of clues, and something strange struck him. The mesh screen on the room's window was missing, and the window wasn't fully closed. It had a gap big enough to sneak a finger through it. He found the mesh screen in Skylar's closet. Also, he found a bench positioned perfectly under the window. Dave could arrive at a vague conclusion that his daughter had been sneaking out of the house. However, if Skylar had come back home after sneaking out, she would have placed the mesh back in place and moved the bench in order to avoid getting caught. This simple logic made Dave conclude that his daughter did not return home after sneaking out the previous night. With time, Mary arrived home, and the worried parents decided to give their daughter a couple more hours of time to return. However, when they received a call from Wendy's asking if he knew why their daughter didn't turn up to work, this proved to be the tipping point. Dave called the police and a complaint was filed. Later that evening, Sheila rang Mary and inquired if Skylar had returned, to which she told her that she didn't, and that they had informed the police. Panicked by what she heard, Sheila told Mary that she had met Skylar the previous night. Sheila, Skylar, and Rachel had been best friends for a really long time, and they used to always hang out together. But what her parents didn't know was this trio sneaked out of their houses at night and smoked weed together. Mary was shocked to hear this. Sheila also said that, in order to not wake up their parents, both while picking up and dropping, they would park the car 2 blocks away from their houses. And like always, they dropped Skylar 2 blocks away from her house the previous night. This frightened Mary and Dave, making them think that their child was abducted. So Skylar's parents met Sheila's parents and went about searching all around their apartment in hopes of finding their daughter. Despite wasting hours together and knocking on a multitude of doors, they found no clues of Skylar's whereabouts. It was then Mary remembered that their apartment building had a security camera facing the road. They rushed to their apartment and viewed the footage after explaining the situation to the security manager. Sheila said that she dropped off Skylar at 12 a.m, but the footage showed Skylar running towards a car at 12:30 and getting into its back seat herself. The car was so far away that its make or registration number was not visible. Seeing this footage relieved Dave and Mary of the fear of abduction, as she seemed to get into the car willingly. The police went through the footage and told the parents that Skylar had run away, and it was quite common in teens. They told her that she would most probably return when she feels comfortable. Despite the police's best efforts and flyers put all over the town, Skylar's whereabouts remained obscure for almost 6 months. However, in December of the same year, Rachel had an extreme mental breakdown. She went around breaking things and punching her family. It got so bad that her mom called the police and asked for assistance. The police went to her house and admitted her to a nearby psychiatric hospital where she was treated for a few days. The moment she was discharged, right to the police station to make a blood-curdling confession. Back on the day when Skylar went missing, she came back from her night shift and went to her room to sleep. As she wasn't feeling drowsy yet, she was fidgeting with her phone and reading the messages she had received. It was then she received messages from Rachel and Sheila asking her if she could sneak out and join them to smoke weed with them that night. But Skylar outright rejected it. Why did she reject it? According to some of her other friends, Sheila and Rachel were seemingly avoiding Skylar, and the trio was appearing to be turning into a duo of Sheila and Rachel. Seeing her best friends change hurt Skylar, and to show her resentment, she started to avoid them. However, she gave in to their persuasions and decided to hang out with them that night. Sheila came in a car and picked Skylar up right in front of her apartment building. Yes, the car that was seen in that footage was none other than Sheila's. The girls decided to go to an inhabited place, which was around 45 minutes from the town, to smoke weed. Since it was a place they had already been to, Skylar didn't think much of it. The girls got to the location, got out of the car, sat in such a way that Skylar was closest to the car, and started to roll the joint. When Sheila was about to light it, she figured out that she had left the lighter inside the car itself. She asked Skylar to get her from the car, to which she obliged. As Skylar was walking towards the car, she heard her 2 friends shout, 1, 2, 3. And before she could react, she felt 2 knives getting plunged into her back. She tried running away from the attackers, but Sheila tackled her down, and with the help of Rachel, pinned her down. The girls then started to stab Skylar in the chest and neck again and again, while she kept asking, "Why are you doing this to me?" Rachel stopped after a few stabs, but Sheila kept stabbing until her neck stopped making gurgling sounds. The girls then brought shovels and bleach from the car. They cleaned themselves and their knives with bleach and tried to dig a grave with the shovels. But since the ground was too hard, they threw Skylar's body on a log that lay nearby and threw rocks, sticks, and everything that their hands could pick up on her body. They covered her body completely and left the place after clearing any possible evidence. On investigation, it was found that Sheila and Rachel had planned this for a month and finally executed it to perfection. So why did they kill Skylar? They killed her because they didn't like her. Yeah, you heard that right. They killed her because they didn't like her anymore. To add on, when Skylar's remains were found by the police, Sheila tweeted, "We really did go on 3."